Welcome back, dream wanderers, and take your midnight passport to the strangest corners of human consciousness. Tonight's journey, we're exploring the inexplicable phenomenon of people who literally married someone they first met while fast asleep. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button only if you enjoy falling down psychological rabbit holes at 2 a.m. Drop your location and current time in the comments. I love imagining our global constellation of insomniacs all connected through these strange stories. Settle in somewhere comfortable, turn down those lights, and prepare your mind for some reality-bending Kayleys. If your eyelids get heavy, consider it part of the experience, though fair warning, these stories might just keep you wide awake wondering about your own dreamscape encounters. The human subconscious is wild, isn't it? We spend a third of our lives asleep, and somehow our brains create entire people who feel so real that some dreamers have actually hunted them down in waking life and put rings on their fingers. The boundary between dreams and reality isn't just blurry. Sometimes it completely dissolves. Let's dive into our first otherworldly romance. A case so bizarre that even skeptics had to admit something unexplainable was happening between sleep and wakefulness. Guys, forget everything you think you know about psychic predictions because we're about to dive into the story of the most accurate fortune teller in history, and I'm not even exaggerating. Picture this. It's 1777, and there's this 14-year-old girl hanging out on the tropical island of Martinique in the Caribbean. Her name is Marie-Joseph Rose Tascher de la Pedre, which is already a mouthful, but everyone just calls her Rose. She's basically a privileged colonial teenager, living her best island life, probably complaining about having to wear corsets in the tropical heat, and wondering what exciting adventures await beyond the sugar plantations. Now, Rose is curious about her future like any teenager would be. But instead of checking her Instagram horoscope or asking her magic 8-ball, she decides to visit this local fortune teller. We're talking about an elderly Afro-Caribbean woman known for her obeah practices, basically the Caribbean version of mystical wisdom mixed with some seriously powerful spiritual knowledge. This woman's name was Euphemie David, and she had a reputation for seeing things that others couldn't. Think of her as the original psychic hotline, but with actual supernatural abilities and probably way better customer service. So, teenage Rose shows up to Euphemie's place, probably giggling with her friends, thinking this is going to be fun entertainment. Maybe she expects to hear about some handsome boy she danced with at the next plantation party, or perhaps that she marry well and live happily ever after in some fancy French chateau. Typical teenager dreams. But Euphemie takes one look at this girl and her expression changes. We're talking about that moment when a psychic realizes they're about to deliver information that's going to blow someone's mind into next century. Euphemie starts reading Rose's palm, and what she sees makes her pause. This isn't your typical "you'll meet a tall, dark stranger" reading. The fortune teller begins slowly, almost reluctantly, because what she's seeing is so impossible, so outrageous, that even she has trouble believing it. But she's been doing this long enough to trust her visions, no matter how crazy they might sound. "Listen carefully, child," Euphemie says, probably with that serious tone that makes teenagers suddenly pay attention. "Your life will be divided into parts, like chapters in a book, but these won't be ordinary chapters. First, you will be married, not once, but twice. Your first marriage will be arranged, as is proper for a girl of your station, but it will bring you little happiness. You will marry a man connected to your family, and you'll travel far from this island to France." Rose is probably thinking, okay, that sounds normal enough. Arranged marriage to some French guy, check. That's basically what my parents are planning anyway. But then Euphemie's voice changes, becomes more intense, more mystical. "But here's where your story becomes extraordinary. Your first husband will die young, tragically, violently. You will become a widow before you truly become a wife. You will know sorrow, imprisonment, and you will come close to death yourself. But you will survive when others do not." At this point, Rose is probably getting a little freaked out. This isn't the fun fortune-telling session she was expecting. Death? Imprisonment? That's heavy stuff for a 14-year-old who's mainly concerned about which dress to wear to the next social gathering. But Euphemie isn't finished. In fact, she's just getting to the really mind-blowing part. Her voice becomes stronger, more confident, as if she's seeing something so clearly it can't be denied. After your sorrow, after your trials, you will marry again. Your second husband will be a man of little fortune when you meet him, a man darker in complexion, smaller in stature. People will think you're foolish to marry him, but this man... Euphemie pauses dramatically, probably because what she's about to say sounds completely insane. This man will rise higher than anyone can imagine. He will become more powerful than kings. And you, child, you will be greater than a queen. You will be crowned with gold. You will rule over an empire. You will be known throughout the world. Rose is probably laughing at this point because, come on, her, greater than a queen? That's ridiculous. She's a teenage girl from a small Caribbean island. The most powerful position she could realistically hope for is maybe being the wife of some minor French nobleman. Becoming greater than a queen is like saying she'd become an astronaut or invent the internet. It's pure fantasy. But Euphemie isn't done delivering this cosmic download of future information. Her expression becomes sadder, more somber. But all this power, all this glory, it will come at a price. Your second marriage will bring you to the heights of power, but it will also bring you great pain. The man who loves you enough to make you an empress will also be the man who breaks your heart. You will know the agony of loving someone who belongs as much to the world as he does to you. And in the end, despite all your power and glory, you will die separated from the one you loved most, longing for the simple happiness of your youth here on this island. Now imagine being 14 years old and hearing this prophecy. It's like getting a trailer for the most dramatic movie ever made, except it's supposedly your actual life. Rose probably left that fortune-telling session with her head spinning, unable to decide whether to laugh at the absurdity or worry about the darker parts of the prediction. For years, Rose carried this prophecy with her like a secret. When her parents arranged her marriage to Alexander de Beauharnais, a French aristocrat, she probably remembered Euphemie's words about marrying a family connection and traveling to France. When she arrived in Paris and found herself in an unhappy marriage with a man who was often cold and indifferent to her, she might have thought about the prediction of an unhappy first marriage. But when the French Revolution erupted and everything familiar was destroyed, when her husband was arrested and guillotined during the Reign of Terror, when she herself was thrown into prison and came within days of sharing his fate, Euphemie's words must have echoed in her mind with terrifying clarity. The fortune-teller had been right about the violent death, the imprisonment, the near-death experience. After her release from prison, Rose found herself a widow at 31, struggling to survive in post-revolutionary France. She reinvented herself, became part of the fashionable society, and eventually caught the attention of a young, ambitious military officer named Napoleon Bonaparte. And here's where the prophecy gets seriously spooky. Napoleon was indeed darker in complexion, smaller in stature, and of little fortune when they met. He was just a promising general from Corsica, not particularly wealthy, not particularly well connected. People did think Rose was making a questionable choice in marrying Napoleon. He was 6 years younger, he was obsessive and intense, and he didn't come from the kind of established family that would be expected for someone of her social position. But Rose, now calling herself Josephine at Napoleon's request, remembered Euphemie's words about the second husband who would rise to unimaginable heights. And boy, did Napoleon rise. From general to first consul to emperor of France, he conquered most of Europe and established an empire that stretched from Spain to the borders of Russia. And Josephine? She became exactly what Euphemie had predicted, greater than a queen. She was crowned Empress of France in a ceremony so magnificent that it redefined royal pageantry. Napoleon literally placed the crown on her head himself, making her the most powerful woman in Europe. For a decade, Josephine lived at the absolute pinnacle of power and luxury. She renovated palaces, collected art, influenced fashion across Europe, and held court for the most important people in the world. She had gone from a teenage girl on a Caribbean island to the Empress of the French, ruling over an empire of 70 million people. If someone had written this as fiction, publishers would have rejected it as too unbelievable. But Euphemie had also predicted heartbreak, and that came true too. Napoleon's love for Josephine was passionate but complicated. His need for an heir, combined with political pressures, eventually led him to divorce her so he could marry someone younger who might give him a son. The man who had made her an empress was also the man who broke her heart by casting her aside for reasons of state. The most haunting part of the prophecy was also the most accurate. Euphemie had said that despite all her power and glory, Josephine would die separated from her true love, longing for the simple happiness of her Caribbean youth. And that's exactly what happened. Josephine died at Malmaison in 1814. While Napoleon was in exile on Elba, her last words were reportedly, Bonaparte, Elba, the island, showing that even in death, she was thinking of the man who had fulfilled the prophecy by making her greater than a queen. When Napoleon heard of her death, he locked himself in his room and wept. During his final exile on St. Helena, he said, "I truly loved my Josephine, but I did not appreciate her enough." The cosmic love story that began with a teenage prophecy ended with an emperor's regret and an empress's longing. Now, let's talk about how absolutely mind-blowing this prophecy was in terms of specificity and accuracy. Euphemie didn't just say, "You'll be important," or "You'll marry well." She predicted multiple marriages, violent death, imprisonment, survival against odds, a second marriage to a man of little fortune who would become incredibly powerful, becoming greater than a queen, and ultimately dying separated from her love while missing her youth. That's not vague fortune-teller speak. That's like getting a detailed biography of events that hadn't happened yet. The statistical probability of all these predictions coming true by coincidence is basically zero. We're talking about predicting that a Caribbean teenager would become Empress of France at a time when France was still a monarchy, before the revolution that would make such a rise possible had even begun. It's like predicting that a kid from Kansas will become president of Mars before we've even invented space travel. This story makes you question everything you think you know about time, destiny, and the nature of reality. Did Euphemie somehow see across decades into a fixed future? Was she tapping into some cosmic database of predetermined events? Or are some people just naturally connected to the larger patterns of the universe in ways we don't understand? Modern skeptics might argue that Josephine, knowing the prophecy, unconsciously made choices that fulfilled it. Maybe she was subconsciously drawn to Napoleon because she remembered the prediction about a dark man of little fortune. Maybe her belief in the prophecy gave her the confidence and ambition necessary to rise to such heights. But that still doesn't explain how a Caribbean fortune teller could predict the French Revolution, Napoleon's rise, or the specific circumstances of an empire that didn't exist yet. The story also highlights the double-edged nature of getting what you wish for. Josephine achieved everything Euphemie had predicted: power, glory, a crown, historical immortality. But she also experienced everything the fortune teller had warned about: heartbreak, separation, and the loss of simple happiness. The prophecy was completely accurate, but it wasn't entirely a blessing. What makes this even more fascinating is that this wasn't a one-time lucky guess. Euphemie David had a reputation throughout Martinique for accurate predictions. She was reportedly consulted by many of the island's elite families, and her prophecies had a track record of coming true. But none of her other predictions were as spectacular or well-documented as what she told teenage Rose. The Josephine prophecy also raises questions about the nature of dreams and destiny that tie perfectly into our themes. Was Euphemie accessing the same cosmic information network that sends people prophetic dreams? Are some individuals naturally more tuned into the universe's mysterious communication system? And if our futures are somehow knowable in advance, what does that say about free will and the choices we make? From a relationship perspective, the prophecy is like the ultimate cosmic dating profile. You'll marry twice, first unhappily, then to a man who will make you an empress but also break your heart. Talk about managing expectations. But it also shows how love and destiny can be intertwined in ways we don't expect. Josephine's great love wasn't just a personal relationship. It was a force that reshaped European history. The story reminds us that sometimes the most impossible dreams actually do come true, but they come with prices we never anticipated. Josephine got to be greater than a queen, but she lost the simple happiness of her youth. She gained an empire but lost the exclusive love of the man who gave it to her. The universe, it seems, has a complicated sense of justice. Whether you believe in psychic predictions or not, Josephine's story is a reminder that life can be far stranger and more dramatic than we ever imagined. A teenage girl from a Caribbean island became one of the most powerful women in history, exactly as predicted by a fortune teller decades before any of it seemed possible. Sometimes reality is more magical than fiction, and sometimes the most unbelievable prophecies turn out to be the most accurate maps of our cosmic destiny. All right, dreamers, we need to talk about something that's been bothering humans for literally thousands of years. How do you know if that amazing person you dreamed about is actually your soulmate or just your brain playing tricks on you? Well, the ancient Greeks had this figured out way before we had dating apps, and their solution was both brilliant and absolutely wild. They believed that every single dream came through one of two cosmic doorways, and depending on which door your dream used, you could tell whether your subconscious was giving you genuine divine intel or just messing with your head for fun. Picture this, it's ancient Greece and people are taking their dreams seriously, like really seriously. Not, I had a weird dream last night, seriously, but this dream might determine the fate of nations seriously. The Greeks believed that dreams weren't just random brain static while you slept. They were actual messages being delivered from a whole pantheon of dream specialists called the oneroi. Think of them as the cosmic postal service, but instead of delivering mail, they're delivering your nightly entertainment, prophetic visions, and yes, information about your romantic future. The oneroi were these dark-winged spirits who lived in a cave near the edge of the world, basically the cosmic equivalent of a call center, but way more mystical. Every night they would emerge from their cave like a flock of bats and spread out across the world to deliver dreams to sleeping humans. But here's where it gets interesting. To reach you, they had to pass through one of two gates. And which gate they chose determined whether your dream was legit divine guidance or complete nonsense. The first gate was made of horn. In Greek, the word for horn sounds similar to the word for fill or accomplish. So dreams that came through the horn gate were the real deal. These were prophetic dreams, divine messages, genuine insights from the gods. If you dreamed about your future spouse and that dream came through the horn gate, congratulations, the universe was giving you actual dating advice. The second gate was made of ivory, and in Greek, the word for ivory sounds like the word for deceive. So, dreams that came through the ivory gate were basically cosmic pranks. They looked real, they felt meaningful, but they were just your brain creating elaborate fantasies with no connection to reality. If you dreamed about marrying your celebrity crush and that dream came through the ivory gate, sorry, that's just wishful thinking with better special effects. Now, imagine if we had this system today. You wake up from an amazing dream where you're slow dancing with your crush at some romantic candlelit dinner, and instead of spending the whole day analyzing whether it means something, you could just check which cosmic gate it came through. Horn gate? Text them immediately. The universe is giving you a sign. Ivory gate? Maybe focus on people who actually know you exist. The Greeks took this so seriously that they built it into their literature. In Homer's Odyssey, Penelope talks about these gates when she's trying to figure out whether her dream about Odysseus returning home is real or just her wishful thinking. She's basically doing the ancient equivalent of, does this dream mean he's coming back, or am I just being delusional? And honestly, that's a mood we can all relate to. But the system gets even more sophisticated. The Greeks believed that different types of oneroi specialized in different types of dreams. Morpheus was the one who appeared in dreams as human figures, so if you dreamed about a person, that was his department. Icholos, also called Phobeter, specialized in appearing as animals, monsters, or inanimate objects. And Phantassos was the shapeshifter who could appear as literally anything. It was like having different cosmic departments handling different aspects of your dream experience. Think about how this applies to modern dream crushes. If you dream about a specific person, you know, your coworker, your friend, that cute barista, that's Morpheus territory. The dream has human figures, real people from your waking life. But if you dream about some mysterious stranger who doesn't look like anyone you've ever met, or if your dream crush keeps changing appearance, that might be Phantassos messing with you, creating a fantasy figure that doesn't correspond to anyone real. The ancient Greeks also understood that the content of the dream mattered. Dreams that felt vivid, specific, and connected to your real life were more likely to be horngate dreams. But dreams that were surreal, constantly shifting, or involved impossible scenarios were probably ivory gate dreams. So, if you dream about having a normal conversation with someone you actually know, that's more likely to be meaningful than dreaming about flying to Mars with a talking unicorn who happens to look like your ex. This system also acknowledged something modern psychology has confirmed. Our brains are constantly processing information and making connections while we sleep. The horngate dreams might represent your subconscious picking up on real signals. Maybe you did notice that your crush was looking at you differently. Or maybe your brain processed some subtle social cues that your conscious mind missed. The ivory gate dreams, on the other hand, might just be your brain entertaining itself with random fantasies. But here's where the Greek system gets really interesting. They believed you could influence which gate your dreams came through. By living virtuously, honoring the gods, and maintaining spiritual purity, you could increase your chances of receiving horngate dreams. Basically, if you were a good person with genuine intentions, the universe was more likely to send you accurate information. But if you were being selfish, dishonest, or spiritually sloppy, you get more ivory gate nonsense. Apply this to modern dating, and it's actually pretty wise advice. If you're approaching relationships with genuine care, emotional honesty, and real interest in another person's well-being, you're more likely to pick up on authentic connection signals. But if you're being manipulative, self-centered, or just projecting your fantasies onto people, you're probably misreading the situation. The Greeks also had specific rituals for encouraging prophetic dreams. They would sleep in temples, make offerings to the gods, and practice something called incubation, basically asking for divine guidance through dreams. People would travel hundreds of miles to sleep in the temple of Asclepius, the god of healing, hoping to receive dreams that would cure their illnesses or solve their problems. Imagine if we had modern dream incubation centers. You could book a session, lie down in a specially designed room, maybe with some aromatherapy and soft music, and specifically request dreams about your love life. Dear universe, please send me a horngate dream about whether I should text my ex. It sounds ridiculous, but honestly, it's not that different from modern meditation, therapy, or even just sleeping on a decision. The really fascinating part is that the Greeks understood dreams as a form of divine communication that required interpretation skills. It wasn't enough to just have a prophetic dream, you had to understand what it meant. They had professional dream interpreters, kind of like ancient therapists who specialized in decoding cosmic messages. These interpreters would help people figure out whether their dreams were literal predictions or symbolic guidance. So let's say you dream about marrying someone specific. A Greek dream interpreter wouldn't just say, "Go propose immediately." They'd ask about the details. How did the person look in the dream? What was the setting? How did you feel? Were there any symbolic elements? Maybe the dream isn't literally about marriage. Maybe it's about the qualities that person represents, or maybe it's about your readiness for commitment in general. This approach is actually pretty sophisticated. Modern dream analysis often focuses on symbolic interpretation rather than literal prediction. If you dream about your crush, it might not mean you're destined to be together. It might mean you're processing your feelings about intimacy, or you're attracted to qualities they represent, or you're working through social anxieties. The horn and ivory gates also represent a balance between hope and realism that's particularly relevant to modern dating. We all want to believe that our romantic dreams mean something, that the universe is somehow guiding us toward our perfect match. But we also need to be realistic about the difference between genuine intuition and wishful thinking. The Greek system suggests that both types of dreams serve important purposes. Horn gate dreams give us genuine insights and guidance when we need them. But ivory gate dreams aren't necessarily bad, they're just different. They let us explore possibilities, process emotions, and entertain ourselves with pleasant fantasies. The key is knowing which is which. In practical terms, this means paying attention to the quality and context of your romantic dreams. Dreams that feel grounded, specific, and connected to real interactions you've had might be worth paying attention to. Dreams that feel fantastical, impossible, or disconnected from reality are probably just your brain having fun. Dreams that inspire you to take positive action in your waking life, like being more open, more confident, or more caring, are probably beneficial regardless of whether they're literally prophetic. The ancient Greeks were onto something profound, the recognition that our inner life is constantly communicating with us. But not all of that communication is equally reliable. Some dreams and intuitions come from deep wisdom, real perception, and genuine spiritual insight. Others come from anxiety, wishful thinking, or just random mental activity. Learning to distinguish between them is a crucial life skill. So, the next time you wake up from an amazing dream about someone special, ask yourself, did this feel like guidance from the horn gate or entertainment from the ivory gate? Did it inspire you to be a better person and take positive action, or did it just feed your fantasies? Are you picking up on real signals in your waking interactions, or are you projecting hopes onto someone who barely knows you exist? The cosmic dating advice from ancient Greece is surprisingly practical. Pay attention to your dreams, but don't let them replace real-world action and honest communication. Use them as one source of information among many, not as your primary dating strategy. And remember that the universe's most important message might not be about who you should date, but about who you should become. Whether your romantic dreams come through gates of horn or ivory, they're all part of your journey toward understanding yourself and your connections with others. The Greeks understood that love, like dreams, is both earthly and divine, both practical and mystical. Sometimes the universe sends clear signals, and sometimes it just sends beautiful stories. Learning to appreciate both while acting wisely in the real world, that's the real cosmic wisdom. Then there's Frida Kahlo, not exactly a direct dream marriage, but her life was irrevocably altered by a dream of sorts, a traumatic bus accident that shattered her body. What's bizarre is how this physical nightmare opened the door to her becoming one of the most iconic artists of the 20th century. She painted her pain, her fractured body, her split self. And who did she meet and eventually marry after this life-altering event? Diego Rivera, a man whose presence was as monumental and chaotic as the accident itself. It's almost as if the universe, in its bizarre wisdom, needed to break her to build her, and then present her with a partner who would mirror the turbulence of her inner world. Too amusing to make me sleepy, right? Her art became a dreamlike autopsy of her soul. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in the vibrant district of Coyoacán, then a village on the outskirts of Mexico City. Her childhood home, the Casa Azul, the Blue House, was filled with color, contradiction, and quiet strength. It would later become a sanctuary, a battleground, and a museum to one of the most iconic artists of the 20th century. Frida was the third of four daughters born to Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer, and Matilda Calderon, a devout Catholic of indigenous and Spanish descent. Her parents were opposites: Guillermo, reserved and intellectual; Matilda, religious and emotionally distant. Frida would inherit her father's introspection and artistic eye, but also her mother's fierce resilience. As a child, Frida was imaginative, outspoken, and bold. She read voraciously and asked questions most adults didn't want to answer. But at the age of 6, she contracted polio, which left her right leg thinner and weaker than the other, a physical difference she tried to mask with long skirts, but never allowed to limit her spirit. The illness left her bedridden for months and isolated from other children. During this time, she grew close to her father, who encouraged her to exercise, ride bicycles, and stay mentally sharp. Unlike most girls of her time, Frida didn't aspire to become a wife or a homemaker. Her goal was to become a doctor, and she enrolled in the prestigious National Preparatory School in Mexico City at age 15, one of only a handful of girls accepted. There she stood out not just for her intelligence, but for her rebellious wit, radical thinking, and unique sense of style. She joined a group of young intellectuals known as Los Cachuchas, who debated philosophy, literature, and politics. Frida was drawn to revolution, to ideas that challenged tradition. But even in those early years, before the bus crash that would define her body and before the fame that would define her legacy, Frida Kahlo was already painting herself into the world with sharp edges, unapologetic ideas, and an identity too big to fit inside anyone else's expectations. She wasn't just growing up in Cayocan. She was preparing to remake herself entirely. It was like she was destined to be a superhero, but instead of a cape, she had a paintbrush and a whole lot of internal fire. On September 17, 1925, Frida Kahlo's life was split in two: the girl she had been and the woman she was forced to become. That afternoon, she boarded a wooden bus with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias, after school. They were laughing, teasing each other, and probably arguing. Frida never did anything halfway. But moments later, the bus collided with a streetcar, and in an instant, her future unraveled into pain, metal, and silence. The crash was horrific. The streetcar crushed the bus against a wall, splintering wood and flinging passengers. Frida was impaled by an iron handrail. It entered her left hip and exited through her pelvis. Her spinal column fractured in 3 places, her right leg shattered, her foot dislocated, her collarbone and ribs broke, her shoulder was dislocated, and her abdomen was pierced. She was just 18 years old. A man covered her with a borrowed overcoat. Someone else noticed her body was sparkling, not from blood, but from the gold powder she had been carrying in a pouch. It had exploded on impact, dusting her broken form in what looked like glittering ash. Frida was taken to the Red Cross hospital and underwent numerous surgeries over the following months. She spent weeks in a body cast, flat on her back, immobile, writhing with infection and uncertainty. The future she'd imagined of becoming a doctor slipped further away with every passing day. But in that stillness, something began to stir. Her father gave her brushes. Her mother rigged a special easel to hang above her bed. A mirror was placed on the canopy so she could see herself. And there, lying in plaster and agony, Frida began to paint. First out of boredom, then out of obsession. Her first subjects were her own reflection because she was all she had. But what emerged wasn't vanity, it was survival. The crash had broken her physically, but it had also opened a door into her own mind, her own body, and eventually into the surreal language of pain and identity that would define her art. The girl who wanted to heal others now began healing herself, one brushstroke at a time. It was like her body was a broken puzzle, and painting was the only way to put the pieces back together, even if they didn't fit perfectly. As Frida Kahlo lay encased in plaster and steel, a body fighting itself with every breath, she began to paint. What started as a form of therapy soon became a language. and that language was deeply personal, brutally honest, and often hard to look at, which was precisely the point. Frida didn't paint pretty flowers or polite landscapes. She painted pain, her pain physical, emotional, and existential. Her first subjects were self-portraits, not because she was vain, but because, as she famously said, "I paint myself because I'm so often alone and because I am the subject I know best." Her early works were small in scale, painted on tin or wood panels, inspired by Mexican retablos, devotional paintings meant to tell stories of suffering and miracles. Frida turned this tradition inward. Her body became the canvas, her emotions became the altar. She painted herself as split, as pierced, as bleeding. In one painting, she is impaled by nails like a modern-day martyr. In another, she floats in a barren landscape, tethered to a broken column, a metaphor for her shattered spine. She painted herself weeping, fractured, decapitated, and bare, but never passive, always watching. Her pain was not sanitized. She painted the ugliness of trauma with beauty, defiance, and even humor. Each piece was a reclamation of her body, her experience, and her identity as a woman in a world that often tried to define her. But Frida wasn't just telling her story. She was inventing a new kind of visual narrative. One that blended Mexican folk art, surrealism, medical illustration, and symbolism. Her paintings became dreamlike autopsies of her soul, framed in color, culture, and myth. By the time she recovered enough to walk again, albeit painfully, Frida was no longer the girl who had wanted to be a doctor. She was an artist, and her art was unlike anything anyone had seen. She had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and turned it into a source of creation. Frida Kahlo didn't just paint her pain. She made the world look at it, and in doing so, she turned suffering into a sacred act of self-expression. It was like she was saying, "Yeah, I'm broken. So what? Look at what I can do with it." In 1928, still recovering, still painting, and just 21 years old, Frida Kahlo met the man who would become the most profound and turbulent relationship of her life, Diego Rivera. He was 20 years her senior, already Mexico's most famous painter. Massive in both stature and presence, Rivera was a giant of Mexican muralism, known for his sweeping, politically charged frescoes that told the story of the Mexican people. Frida had seen his work before and admired it, but now she wanted his opinion of her work. She brought her paintings to him at the Ministry of Education, interrupting his scaffolded work to ask bluntly, "Do I have talent?" Diego took one look and said yes, and not just out of kindness. He recognized in her something rare, an unfiltered voice, raw and unpretentious, full of rage, irony, pain, and beauty. They began a relationship that was as consuming as it was creative. Frida once said, "I suffered 2 accidents in my life. One in which a streetcar knocked me down, the other was Diego." They married in 1929, an odd pairing to outsiders. Diego, massive, unfaithful, politically famous. Frida, sharp-tongued, fiercely independent, already walking with a cane. Her parents called it a marriage between an elephant and a dove. Their bond was passionate but chaotic. Diego supported her art and encouraged her growth as a painter. But he was also endlessly unfaithful, even with Frida's own sister, Cristina. Frida was devastated, and in return she took lovers of her own, both men and women, including rumored affairs with Leon Trotsky and painter Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, then remarried a year later with different terms. This time, Frida would keep her autonomy, her home, her money, her name. Their second marriage was less about traditional love and more about creative partnership and mutual understanding. Despite the betrayals and the heartbreak, Diego remained a constant force in Frida's life. He challenged her, he wounded her, but he also believed in her as an artist, as a revolutionary, and as a woman who could redefine what painting could be. Together they were not peaceful, but they were legendary. It was less a marriage and more a force of nature colliding with another force of nature. In the 1930s, Frida Kahlo followed Diego Rivera on a journey north to San Francisco. Detroit and New York as he completed high-profile mural commissions. These years abroad brought her face-to-face with American industrialism, wealth, and the contradictions of capitalism, and they left her with deep political discomfort. Frida was a proud Mexican nationalist, a committed communist, and an admirer of indigenous traditions. The opulence she witnessed in the United States, especially while the Great Depression ravaged much of the country, only deepened her sense of disillusionment. In letters home, she mocked the culture's materialism and obsession with appearances. She missed the grit, color, and contradiction of Mexico. While Diego painted enormous murals on factory walls, Frida began to paint smaller, quieter revolutions, deeply personal works on tin and canvas. Her style solidified, sharp, surreal, emotional, and intimate. It was during this time that she produced some of her most iconic self-portraits. Frida didn't just paint herself for vanity. She painted herself to survive. Her identity became her landscape. With her body constantly in pain from her accident, multiple surgeries, and a failed pregnancy in Detroit, she turned inward. Her portraits showed her bleeding, fragmented, exposed, yet her face was always calm, always direct, unapologetic. One of her most powerful works, Henry Ford Hospital, shows her lying on a hospital bed, crying, surrounded by floating symbols of loss: a fetus, a snail, medical equipment, a cracked pelvis. It was raw, graphic, and deeply emotional, a canvas that bled with truth. Back in Mexico, Frida immersed herself in leftist politics. She and Diego welcomed Leon Trotsky into their home while he lived in exile. Frida wore Taiwana dresses, traditional indigenous garments, not just as fashion, but as a political and cultural statement. Her art was never disconnected from her beliefs. Her identity, her body, and her ideology all intertwined in her work. While Rivera was painting murals of revolution, Frida painted its human cost: the body in pieces, the mind on fire, and the self always staring back. In exile and in illness, she became not just a painter of pain, but a painter of resistance. She was basically the punk rock star of the art world, but with more corsets and less spitting. When Frida Kahlo returned to Mexico in the late 1930s, she was no longer just Diego Rivera's wife. She had become something else entirely, a force, an artist whose work radiated with raw honesty, surreal symbolism, and cultural identity. Back in her homeland, she stepped fully into herself. Her Casa Azul in Cayocan became a sanctuary of color and contradiction. Bright cobalt walls, yellow trim, Aztec statues in the garden, monkeys and parrots wandering freely the house was a living extension of Frida's imagination. It was a blend of tradition and rebellion, elegance and earth. Here she surrounded herself with pre-Columbian artifacts, ex-votos, folk art, and revolutionary books. She wore bold Taiwana dresses, wove flowers into her hair, and painted amid the scent of copal incense and the sounds of mariachi on the street outside. This period marked an explosion of creativity. Her paintings became more intricate, more symbolic, and more political. Works like The Two Fridas revealed a divided self, one in European dress with a bleeding heart, the other in indigenous clothing, strong and composed. It was Frida's visual autobiography, a portrait of love, loss, and heritage. In 1939, she exhibited her work in Paris, where artists like Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky praised her fiercely original style. But even among the surrealists, Frida stood apart. When André Breton tried to label her as one of their own, she pushed back. "They thought I was a surrealist," she said, "but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." She painted Mexico, not the romantic postcard version, but the living, breathing country she adored. Her work pulsed with symbolism: skeletons, hummingbirds, hearts, thorns, corn, and blood. She honored the indigenous roots of her homeland while unmasking the violence of its past and present. But even as her artistic voice grew stronger, her health continued to decline. Multiple surgeries, infections, and chronic pain became daily realities. Still, she painted through it, propped up in bed, torso bound in corsets, fingers clenched around the brush. Frida had returned to Mexico, not to rest, but to reclaim her power through paint, through politics, and through her fearless embrace of the self. She was basically a one-woman revolution, armed with a paintbrush and a fierce determination to be herself. As the 1940s wore on, Frida Kahlo's body continued to betray her. Her spine was deteriorating, her right leg was constantly infected. She underwent more than 30 surgeries in her lifetime, often in grueling succession. At times, she was bedridden for months, encased in body casts or immobilized by traction devices that stretched her bones apart. But still she painted. Each canvas during these years became both a release and an act of resistance. Her works grew darker, more defiant. She painted with a clarity sharpened by pain. Refusing to hide behind metaphor, in the broken column, she presents herself split down the middle, her body pierced with nails, a cracked ionic column replacing her spine. Yet her face is stoic, her gaze unflinching. Pain for Frida was no longer just a subject. It was her companion, her antagonist, her muse. Her political voice also grew louder. She joined the Mexican Communist Party, marched in demonstrations, wrote fiery letters, and called out imperialism and injustice. When her health no longer allowed her to walk, she appeared at protests in a wheelchair, defiantly holding signs and shouting slogans. In 1953, Frida was given her first solo exhibition in Mexico, a long overdue celebration of her art. But her health was so fragile, doctors told her she couldn't attend. So she did what only Frida would do. She arrived by ambulance, carried in on a stretcher, and placed in the center of the gallery on her hospital bed. Dressed in traditional finery, surrounded by her own work, she greeted guests with tequila, laughter, and that fire still burning in her eyes. Her final paintings were both childlike and harrowing. In Marxism, Will Give Health to the Sick, she painted herself wearing a steel corset, cradled by the hands of Marx, casting away symbols of oppression. Her last known work was a still life of sliced watermelons, one piece bearing the words, "Viva la vida," long live life. Even in the face of death, she remained defiant, joyful, and political. Frida Kahlo's last portraits weren't just self-portraits. They were acts of revolution, painted in pain, but always signed with life. She was basically a living, breathing art installation, and everyone was invited to the show. On July 13, 1954, at the age of 47, Frida Kahlo died in the same place she had been born, La Casa Azul in Cayocan. The official cause was listed as a pulmonary embolism, but those closest to her whispered of something deeper. She had been ill, yes, but also exhausted by pain, by surgeries, by the long war with her own body. Just days before, she had attended a political protest against the CIA coup in Guatemala. Weak and wheelchair-bound, she insisted on going, her clenched fist raised in the air. Revolution remained her final heartbeat. Her last diary entry was brief but piercing. "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Frida's funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Artes, Mexico's most prestigious cultural institution. Her body, draped in the red flag of the Mexican Communist Party, was watched over by friends, family, artists, and revolutionaries. Diego Rivera was inconsolable. He called her the greatest love of his life, even as his betrayals had nearly broken her. But in the years that followed her death, something extraordinary happened. Frida Kahlo refused to disappear. At first, her name was whispered only in art circles. Her works weren't easy to categorize, too political for surrealists, too surreal for traditionalists. But slowly her image, her story, and her defiance began to resonate. Through the 1970s and 1980s, as feminist scholars and activists reclaimed forgotten voices, Frida's became louder. She wasn't just a painter anymore. She was a symbol of pain turned into beauty, of feminism born through resistance, of Mexican identity celebrated without apology, of queerness, disability, revolution, and authenticity. Her face, unibrow, gaze, flowers in her hair became iconic. Her home became a museum, her diary became a sacred text, and her paintings now hang in the world's greatest museums. Frida Kahlo had lived much of her life in Diego's shadow, but in death, she stepped forward. She didn't just leave behind paintings. She left behind a mirror and dared us all to look. Not with pity, not with fear, but with fire. Today, Frida Kahlo's face is everywhere. Printed on t-shirts, painted on murals, turned into dolls, memes, posters, and icons. Her signature unibrow, her flower-crowned hair, her direct gaze, all instantly recognizable. But what makes her legacy powerful isn't just that people know her face. It's that they recognize the truth behind it. Frida didn't try to be flawless. She didn't fit into boxes. She wasn't conventional, and she didn't care to be. In a world that demands perfection, she gave us realness. Raw, messy, vibrant, angry, joyful, contradictory realness. She celebrated what made her different: her disability, her queerness, her politics, her culture, and turned it into art that transcended borders and decades. She's become more than an artist. She's a global symbol of defiance, feminism, cultural pride, and creative resistance. For queer communities, she's a fearless bisexual icon who lived openly and unapologetically in a time that demanded silence. For women, she's a reminder that power doesn't require permission. For disabled artists, she's proof that pain can fuel the brush, not stop it. And for Mexico, she's a daughter reclaimed, fierce, folkloric, and forever part of the national soul. Her paintings, once dismissed as too strange or too personal, are now among the most revered in the world. Works like the two Fridas, self-portrait with thorn necklace and hummingbird, and the broken column aren't just seen. They're felt deeply by anyone who has ever suffered and needed to turn that suffering into something sacred. She lived in the margins and turned them into center stage. She embraced contradiction. A communist who wore gold, a woman betrayed who loved again, a body in pieces with a soul unbreakable. And through it all, she painted, not just with color, but with conviction. Frida Kahlo never asked to be a symbol. She simply told the truth about herself, and in doing so, told the truth for millions of others who had never seen themselves reflected in art before. Now, when we see her face, we see courage, we see color. We see resistance, we see Frida not gone, but immortal. So picture this. It's the 9th century in Baghdad, the absolute golden age of the Islamic world, and we've got this guy named Ahmad ibn Malik. Now, Ahmad isn't living his best life. Dude's basically broke. His business is failing, and he's probably wondering why his life turned out to be the medieval equivalent of a really depressing reality show. But then something incredible happens. He has this dream. Not just any dream, but the kind of dream that makes you wake up in a cold sweat going, what the actual hell was that? In this dream, some mysterious figure appears to him. Think Gandalf meets a really persistent GPS system and tells him, Ahmad, my guy, your treasure, your destiny, your entire future is waiting for you in Cairo. Pack your bags, hit the road, and go find your fortune. Now, most of us would probably roll over, hit snooze, and forget about it by breakfast. But Ahmad, this man takes his dreams seriously. Maybe too seriously. He's basically the 9th century version of someone who books a flight to Bali, because their horoscope said something about travel. So what does our boy Ahmad do? He sells everything. His shop, his merchandise, probably his favorite camel, everything. His neighbors are probably like, Ahmad, bro, you're having a midlife crisis over a dream. But Ahmad is committed. He's all in. He takes his life savings, which probably wasn't much to begin with, and starts the absolutely treacherous journey from Baghdad to Cairo. We're talking about crossing deserts, dealing with bandits, sleeping under stars that look nothing like a Holiday Inn ceiling. This is before Google Maps, before GPS. Before anything remotely helpful for navigation except follow the really big sand dunes and hope for the best. The journey takes weeks. Ahmad is traveling with caravans, eating questionable food, dealing with camels that have attitude problems and probably questioning his life choices every single day. But he keeps going because that dream felt so real, so vivid, that he can't shake it. It's like when you have a dream about your ex and wake up confused about your feelings, except Emmett's dream is telling him to cross continents for treasure. That's some next-level subconscious commitment right there. Finally, after what feels like forever, Ahmad arrives in Cairo in the 9th century. This place is massive, bustling, cosmopolitan. Think New York City, but with more pyramids and fewer Starbucks. Ahmad has no idea where to start looking for this mysterious treasure. The dream wasn't exactly specific about coordinates. It was more like, your treasure is in Cairo. Good luck with that. Peace out. Thanks for nothing, mysterious dream figure. So Ahmad starts wandering around Cairo like a lost tourist without TripAdvisor. He's asking people, hey, have you seen any treasure lying around? No? Okay, cool, thanks. People probably think he's lost his mind, which, let's be honest, he kinda has. He spends his days searching, getting increasingly desperate, running out of money, and starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, following a dream across the Middle East wasn't his smartest move. Night falls and Ahmad needs a place to sleep. Back then, mosques weren't just for prayer, they were also community centers, shelters, safe spaces for travelers. So Ahmad finds a mosque, rolls out his sleeping mat, and tries to get some rest while probably having serious doubts about his decision-making skills. He's lying there thinking, tomorrow I'll search more, maybe I'll find something, maybe this wasn't completely insane. But here's where the story gets really wild. That night, while Ahmad is sleeping peacefully in the mosque, a group of thieves decides to rob a house next door. These aren't master criminals. They're more like the Three Stooges of medieval burglary. They're loud, they're clumsy, they wake up the homeowners, who start screaming bloody murder. The police come running, the thieves scatter like cockroaches when the lights come on, and guess who gets caught? Our poor Ahmad, who was just trying to get some sleep and maybe dream about something more helpful this time. The police find Ahmad in the mosque and think, aha, this must be one of the thieves. They don't ask questions first. They just start beating him with sticks. Medieval police weren't exactly known for their nuanced investigative techniques. It was more like, guilty until proven innocent, and we probably won't listen to your proof anyway. Ahmad is getting the beating of his life, and he's probably thinking, I should have just stayed in Baghdad and accepted my boring, broke life. After thoroughly beating him, because apparently that's how they said hello, to strangers in medieval Cairo, they throw Ahmad in prison. And medieval prisons? Let's just say they made modern county jails look like five-star resorts. We're talking stone cells, no windows, probably rats as roommates, and food that would make airplane meals seem gourmet. Ahmad spends 3 days in this nightmare, probably questioning every life choice that led him to this moment. On the third day, the chief of police decides to actually talk to Ahmad instead of just beating him. Revolutionary concept, right? He brings Ahmad out and asks, so who are you and why are you here? And Ahmad, probably still sore from his welcome to Cairo beating, tells the truth. I'm from Baghdad and I came here because of a dream. I know it sounds crazy, but this figure in my dream told me my treasure was here in Cairo. Now, you'd expect the police chief to laugh, call Ahmad an idiot, and throw him back in prison. But instead, something amazing happens. The police chief starts laughing, not at Ahmad, but with a kind of recognition. He says, man, you traveled all this way because of a dream? That's hilarious. You know what's funny? I've been having the exact same kind of dream, but in reverse. The police chief continues, for months now, I've been dreaming about this house in Baghdad. Same dream over and over. There's this specific house on this specific street, in this specific neighborhood, and in the garden behind the house, there's a fountain. And underneath this fountain, there's supposed to be this massive treasure buried. But you know what I did about this dream? Absolutely nothing. Because I'm not crazy enough to travel from Cairo to Baghdad chasing dreams like some people. He gestures at Ahmad with a mix of amusement and pity. As the police chief describes the house, Ahmad's eyes get wider and wider. The street name, the neighborhood, the description of the house, the garden, the fountain, everything the police chief is describing sounds incredibly familiar, too familiar. Because, and here's where the story gets absolutely bonkers, the police chief is describing Ahmad's own house. The house Ahmad sold before leaving Baghdad. The house he'd lived in his entire life. The house with the garden and the fountain that he walked past every single day and never thought twice about. Ahmad is probably having the biggest, "Are you kidding me right now?" moment in history. He traveled hundreds of miles across dangerous desert, got beaten up, thrown in prison, all to find treasure that was literally in his backyard the entire time. It's like driving to another state to find the perfect restaurant only to discover it's next door to your house. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a medieval sword. The police chief, being a decent guy despite the whole beating first asking questions later thing, gives Ahmad some money for travel expenses and releases him. Ahmad probably takes the money while internally screaming. He makes a long journey back to Baghdad, probably the most enlightened and embarrassed man in the Middle East. Every step of the way, he's thinking about that fountain in his garden, wondering how he could have been so blind. When Ahmad finally gets back to Baghdad, he goes straight to his old house. The new owner probably thinks he's crazy when Ahmad asks to dig up the garden, but maybe Ahmad still has some connections, or maybe he buys the house back, or maybe he just really convincingly explains his situation. Either way, he gets permission to dig underneath that fountain. And what does he find? Exactly what the Cairo police chief dreamed about. A treasure so massive it makes all his previous financial troubles look like pocket change. Gold, jewels, enough wealth to set him up for life and probably several future generations. The treasure was there all along, right under his feet, in the place he'd lived his entire life. But here's the beautiful, mind-bending part of this story. Ahmad never would have found the treasure if he hadn't left Baghdad. He needed to go to Cairo, get beaten up, get thrown in prison, and meet that police chief to learn about his own backyard treasure. The dream wasn't wrong, it just took a really roundabout way to get him to the right answer. It's like the universe was playing the world's most elaborate practical joke, but with a happy ending. Think about the cosmic irony here. Ahmad's treasure was always in Baghdad, but he could only find it by going to Cairo. The Cairo police chief knew where the treasure was, but he couldn't get it because he was in the wrong city. It took both of their dreams, both of their stories connecting, for either of them to understand the full picture. It's like a medieval buddy cop movie where the cops never actually team up but accidentally solve each other's cases. This story becomes this incredible metaphor for how sometimes we have to journey far from home to understand what was always right in front of us. How many times do we search for happiness, success, love, meaning in distant places when it might be waiting in our own backyard? Ahmad literally traveled across the known world to find out he was already home. And think about the relationship angle here, which fits perfectly with our theme of dream marriages and cosmic connections. Ahmad had to leave everything familiar, travel to a foreign place, suffer hardship, meet a stranger, and share his most vulnerable story before he could discover his true treasure. That's basically the entire dating experience condensed into one epic journey. Sometimes you have to kiss a lot of frogs in a lot of different cities before you realize your prince was your neighbor all along. The story also makes you wonder about the nature of dreams and destiny. Was Ahmad's dream divinely inspired? Was it his subconscious somehow knowing about the treasure? Was it just random neurons firing that happened to lead to an incredible coincidence? And what about the Cairo police chief having the complementary dream? Are we all somehow connected in ways we don't understand, sharing information through dreams, creating this invisible network of sleeping wisdom? Modern psychology might say Ahmad's dream represented his inner journey, his need to believe in himself, his willingness to take risks for his dreams. Maybe the treasure was always there. But Ahmad needed to prove to himself that he was worthy of it by being willing to sacrifice everything to pursue his vision. Maybe the journey changed him from someone who would just walk past a fountain every day into someone who would dig underneath it. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe sometimes the universe just has a really weird sense of humor, and sometimes the most impossible coincidences happen to people who are brave enough to follow their dreams, even when those dreams seem completely insane. Ahmad could have stayed in Baghdad, accepted his poverty, and never known about the treasure beneath his feet. Instead, he chose to believe in something bigger than his current reality. The story of Omar ibn Malik reminds us that sometimes our greatest treasures aren't found by looking outward, but by gaining the perspective to see inward more clearly. Sometimes we have to get completely lost to find ourselves. Sometimes we have to travel to the ends of the earth to discover that everything we needed was waiting at home. And if you're sitting there thinking this sounds too good to be true, remember that this story has been told in various forms across cultures for over 1,000 years. It appears in Persian literature, Arabic folklore, European fairy tales, and even modern movies. Maybe it resonates so deeply because we all recognize the truth in it, that often our greatest discoveries come not from finding something new, but from seeing something familiar with fresh eyes. So next time you have a crazy dream about your soulmate being in some distant city, maybe check your own neighborhood first. Your treasure might be closer than you think. But also, don't be afraid to take the journey if that's what it takes to open your eyes to what was always right in front of you. Sometimes the cosmic GPS of dreams takes us on the scenic route for a reason. Ahmad's story is the ultimate reminder that the universe has a twisted sense of humor, but also infinite patience with our journey toward understanding. Whether you're looking for love, treasure, or just trying to figure out your life, remember that sometimes the answer is in your backyard, but you have to travel the world to develop the vision to see it. Now, imagine yourself in London at the close of the 19th century, a city abuzz with the promise of the industrial age, yet still firmly shackled by the conventions of the past. Meet Arthur Finch, a young architect, brilliant but already disillusioned. He possessed undeniable talent, a keen eye for form and function, but he lived perpetually in the shadow of his father, a renowned builder who championed practicality above all else. Arthur spent his days drafting blueprints for dreary warehouses and monotonous terraced houses, each line a dull ache in his soul. His spirit, however, yearned for something truly grand, something that would express the inherent majesty and soaring ambition of architecture. He felt trapped, like a bird in a concrete cage, his artistic wings clipped by the mundane demands of his profession. Arthur's frustration found its most potent expression in his dreams. Night after night he was transported to an ethereal city, a metropolis of impossible beauty, where a colossal structure rose against a sky of an unimaginable, vibrant blue. This was no ordinary edifice. It was a cathedral of glass and steel, its spires twisting like ancient vines reaching towards the stars, its soaring arches defying the very laws of gravity. Every detail was rendered with an almost painful vividness. The way the light filtered through its prismatic stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns across the floor. The resonant echo of footsteps in its vast vaulted corridors. Even the crisp scent of newly cut stone mingling with the clean, pure air that seemed to flow effortlessly through its open spaces. This was a masterpiece that existed only within the boundless expanse of his subconscious. A stranger of epic proportions with which he felt an almost primal connection, as if he were deeply, irrevocably married to its very essence. He saw this structure not merely as a building, but as the materialization of his own soul, a testament to what architecture could be if only the world dared to dream as boldly as he did. Arthur would awaken in a cold sweat, the indelible image of the cathedral seared into his mind. He would spend hours at his drafting table, his hands trembling with a desperate urgency, attempting to capture the impossible complexity of the structure. His sketches were feverish, filled with intricate annotations and audacious calculations that seemed to defy the accepted laws of physics for his era. He knew, with a certainty that bordered on madness, that this was a vision, a profound gift from his subconscious, but also a crushing burden. How could he possibly construct something so magnificent, so utterly revolutionary? In a world that saw only the dull practicality of brick and mortar, a world that measured success in square feet and profit margins, not in soaring aspirations, he tried, oh how he tried. Arthur, fueled by an almost messianic zeal, presented his designs to every potential investor, every patron of the arts, every renowned engineer who would grant him an audience. He spoke with a burning passion about his Cathedral of Dreams, describing it with a precision that often bordered on the unhinged. He detailed the intricate systems of natural ventilation, the suspended galleries that seemed to float effortlessly in the air, the vast, retractable dome that would open to the night sky, inviting the cosmos within. His eyes would shine with the brilliance of his vision, but the eyes of his listeners saw only exorbitant costs, impractical audacity, and a young man teetering on the edge of delusion. "Impossible, young Finch," they would intone, their voices dripping with condescension. The foundations would never support such a weight. The glass would be prohibitively expensive, a fortune squandered. And the technology to erect something of this scale and complexity simply does not exist in our time. The rejection was constant, a relentless barrage of dismissals that felt like a physical blow, one after another. Arthur felt as though his very soul was being systematically torn apart, piece by agonizing piece. The cathedral of his dreams, so utterly real and vibrant in his mind, remained a tantalizing, unattainable fantasy in the waking world. He retreated, isolating himself from society, spending his nights hunched over his drafting table, meticulously perfecting the plans for his unbuilt masterpiece. He had, in a profound and almost spiritual sense, married this vision, dedicating every waking moment and every ounce of his creative energy to it, even though he knew deep down that it might never be concretized. The obsession consumed him, a relentless fire that burned away everything else. He neglected his mundane daytime work, his few remaining friends, and even his own health. The line between the tangible reality of his London studio and the ethereal reality of his dream cathedral became increasingly blurred, until he could barely distinguish one from the other. The society of his era was simply not ready for Arthur's audacious vision. Architecture was, at that time, inextricably linked to traditional construction methods, relying on heavy, solid materials like stone and brick to convey permanence and strength. The very idea of a structure so light, so transparent, so seemingly ephemeral, was considered an affront to the established principles of solidity and gravity. Skepticism was rampant, a thick fog that obscured any glimpse of his genius, and the sheer lack of financial backing proved an insurmountable wall. The necessary technological innovations, the widespread availability of structural steel, the development of large-scale laminated glass, advanced computational methods for stress analysis, were either in their nascent stages or simply had not been developed sufficiently to bring Arthur's ambitious project to fruition. His dreams were decades, perhaps even a century, ahead of their time. Despite these crushing setbacks, Arthur never truly gave up. He became a recluse, yes, but his mind remained more active, more furiously engaged than ever before. He devoured every book he could find on cutting-edge engineering, theoretical physics, and novel materials, seeking every fragment of knowledge that might, however tenuously, justify his seemingly impossible vision. He wrote passionate, often rambling, letters to leading scientists and inventors of his day, describing his cathedral in exquisite detail and imploring them for insights into new technologies. Most ignored him, dismissing him as a mad eccentric. But a precious few, a handful of forward thinkers, saw a fleeting glimpse of genius in his apparent madness. They would send him obscure scientific articles, untested theories, and occasionally a precious sample of a new material or a diagram of a revolutionary type of truss. Arthur would study these with the devotion of a medieval monk poring over sacred texts, meticulously incorporating each new discovery into his ever-evolving plans. He would redraw entire sections of the cathedral, optimizing every curve, every angle, every structural joint. The cathedral in his mind evolved, becoming more complex, more audacious, more impossible, and yet, paradoxically, more real to him with each passing day. His studio, a once ordinary room, transformed into a sacred sanctuary of dreams. The walls were plastered with blueprints, intricate diagrams, and miniature models of sections of the cathedral, each painstakingly crafted. The air hung heavy with the nostalgic scent of ink, old paper, and the faint metallic tang of his relentless ambition. Sometimes he would lose himself for days, forgetting to eat or sleep, utterly consumed by his work, living only for the cathedral that so completely haunted him. He would talk to it, whispering secrets to his models, as if the very structure were a living entity, his silent partner in a profound, intimate union that no one else could ever truly see or comprehend. This cathedral of dreams was his wife, his lover, his muse, and ultimately, his only reason for being. Arthur Finch died a solitary and largely forgotten man. His life's work, those extraordinary sketches and meticulous plans, relegated to dusty boxes in a forgotten corner of his estate. The Cathedral of Dreams remained an unbuilt masterpiece, existing only within the boundless confines of his mind and in the intricate, almost impossibly detailed lines of his drawings. However, decades after his death, a new generation of visionary architects and pioneering engineers rediscovered his forgotten legacy. They were utterly transfixed by the sheer audacity and unparalleled genius of his vision. With the advent of 20th century technology, many of Arthur's impossible ideas suddenly became not only feasible, but groundbreaking. His cathedral, though never physically constructed, directly inspired iconic buildings that would come to define modern architecture. Structures like the soaring elegance of the Eiffel Tower, the revolutionary transparency of the Crystal Palace, or even the fluid, organic forms of the Sydney Opera House. Arthur's story is a bittersweet reminder of how some visions can be simply too grand, too far ahead of their time, to be fully realized in the era of their conception. He was married to a creation that he could never physically touch, a love affair with an abstract ideal. Yet it was this profound connection that shaped his entire life and, in the end, profoundly influenced the future of his art. The crushing impossibility of bringing his dream to fruition in the real world did not deter him. Instead, it compelled him to dedicate himself to it completely, transforming it into both his muse and his beautiful, agonizing prison. This exploration of the idea of an oniric marriage with an impossible creation, and the immense psychological cost of nurturing such a grandiose vision against the backdrop of a resistant reality, forms a central, poignant thread in this narrative. It forces us to question the very limits of human inspiration and the boundaries of what is truly achievable. It's as if he married the future, but was condemned to live in the past, forever yearning for a tomorrow he could only glimpse in his sleep. Now, let's transport ourselves to 18th century Vienna, the glittering capital of classical music, where giants like Mozart and Beethoven walked the cobblestone streets, their notes echoing through grand concert halls. Here we encounter Master Leopold Richter, a composer of considerable renown, celebrated for his majestic symphonies and deeply moving operas. Leopold was a man of exquisite sensitivity, his ear finely tuned to the harmonies of the universe, but lately he was profoundly tormented. For months, a peculiar, almost otherworldly melody had relentlessly pursued him in his dreams. This was no tune he recognized from any existing opera or familiar concerto. It was something entirely novel, a sequence of notes that seemed to emanate from a place beyond the confines of time and space. The melody was both breathtakingly beautiful and profoundly melancholic, with chords that seemed to weep with an ancient sorrow, only to then soar into an ethereal, haunting lament. It was, in essence, a stranger of sound, a musical entity that had chosen him, infiltrating his deepest slumbers and now stubbornly refused to leave him in peace. It manifested in his most profound dreams, echoing with an unnerving clarity in his mind upon waking, and even accompanied him throughout his waking hours, a persistent, almost maddening whisper in the periphery of his consciousness. He felt as though he had entered into a profound, almost spiritual relationship with this melody, a strange, consuming union with an inspiration that felt utterly external to him, almost alien in its origin. Leopold, driven by an insatiable compulsion, attempted to capture it. He would sit at his harpsichord for hours, his agile hands dancing feverishly over the keys, desperately trying to reproduce the elusive notes that so completely haunted his nights. But the melody always eluded him, like a phantom limb, a fleeting shadow. He could grasp fragments, fleeting phrases, but the totality, the complete, assuaging essence of that haunting sound, slipped through his fingers like grains of sand. He felt an agonizing frustration, bordering on madness, at the sheer elusiveness of this song from beyond. His students and colleagues, accustomed to his usual focused intensity, began to notice his distraction, his growing obsession. He would speak of the melody as if it were a living person, a mysterious, ethereal lover who visited him only in the secret world of dreams, leaving him yearning and restless in the harsh light of day. Leopold's all-consuming obsession with this oniric melody began to profoundly affect his work and, inevitably, his burgeoning reputation. Vienna, the undisputed city of music, was also a bustling, cutthroat arena of gossip and artistic rivalries. His colleagues, who had long admired his prolific genius and vibrant, often triumphant musical style, began to notice a distinct and unsettling shift. Leopold's new compositions, while still exhibiting his undeniable technical mastery and intricate counterpoint, now carried a strange, almost unsettling melancholy, a pervasive somber and ethereal tone that was utterly uncharacteristic of his earlier, more joyous works. It was as if he were composing for a phantom audience, for the spirits of the departed, rather than for the glittering, aristocratic salons of Viennese society. The public, who had once hailed him as a prodigy, now found themselves divided. Some discerning critics, perhaps sensing a deeper artistic evolution, praised the profound emotional depth and newfound sensitivity of his later works, interpreting them as a sign of artistic maturation. But others, more pragmatic and less inclined to poetic interpretation, openly questioned whether Master Richter was, in fact, losing his mind. Whispers about his distraction, his distant gaze, and his increasingly reclusive habits spread like wildfire through the city's bustling cafes and opulent theaters. He spoke of the melody as if it were a sentient being, a mysterious, intangible mistress, who graced him only in the realm of dreams. And such pronouncements in a society so rigidly formal and conventional were considered, at the very least, profoundly eccentric. Poor Leopold is marrying the ghosts of his own notes, some would comment with a mixture of pity and thinly veiled derision, as if he were choosing madness over the tangible world. The melody itself was so profoundly powerful that, when Leopold did manage to weave its elusive fragments into his compositions, it evoked an unexpected, almost overwhelming emotional response in his audience, a shared sense of poignant melancholy, as if they too were hearing a lament from an unknown, distant place. It was a beauty that came with a price, a beauty that seemed to tear something from Leopold's very soul and deposit it, raw and bleeding, into the hearts of his listeners. He felt increasingly isolated, understood only by this haunting melody that simultaneously tormented and inspired him. His waking life became a mere prelude to his nights, when he could finally reunite with his song from beyond, a reunion he craved with a desperate intensity. Then came the night of the tempest. Lightning cleaved the Viennese sky, illuminating the city in stark, fleeting flashes, and thunder echoed like the distant drums of war. Leopold was in his studio, utterly exhausted and teetering on the brink of despair. He had spent the entire day in a futile struggle, attempting to compose a new symphony, but the assuaging melody stubbornly refused to conform to any conventional musical structure. He finally succumbed to sleep at his harpsichord, his head heavy upon the keys, and the dream came again, more vivid, more immersive than ever before. This time, the melody was not merely a whisper. It was a full, resplendent orchestra, with strings weeping in unison and woodwinds lamenting in a chorus so ethereal it seemed to fill the entire universe. And then a voice he had never heard before, pure and unearthly, sang the melody. It was a feminine voice, pristine and ethereal, that seemed to emanate from an abyss of both profound sorrow and transcendent beauty, from a place where joy and pain merged into a single, sublime emotion. Upon waking, Leopold experienced a clarity he had never known. The melody was not meant to be captured, imprisoned on paper. It was meant to be felt, to be experienced in its raw, untamed essence. It was not to be a mere piece of his symphony, but the very essence of his soul, the living, breathing voice of his oniric muse. Leopold Richter never fully succeeded in reproducing the melody in its entirety, nor the ethereal voice that accompanied it. But that profound, transformative experience irrevocably altered him. He dedicated the remainder of his life to attempting to express the sensations of that melody in his works, relentlessly exploring the outermost limits of emotion and melancholy in music. His final compositions were deeply profound, intensely introspective, and for some, profoundly disturbing. He had, in a sense, married this elusive inspiration, and it had led him down unexplored paths to artistic realms he would never have ventured into otherwise. He became known as the composer of laments, a title he accepted with a melancholic resignation, for his music was now a direct mirror of his dreams, a haunting echo of the melody that had chosen him. Leopold Richter's story raises fascinating questions about the very nature of artistic inspiration. Where do ideas truly come from? Are they purely internal constructs, or do unseen muses visit us in our dreams, whispering secrets from other realms? Leopold's haunting melody, that stranger of sound, became his ultimate obsession, propelling his work to new, uncharted territories, but also relentlessly haunting him, a lifelong relationship with a non-existent entity. The way an artist grapples with inspiration that feels external, almost alien in its origin, is a theme that resonates deeply with the universal creative experience. This narrative meticulously details the vibrant musical era of 18th century Vienna. Leopold's personal struggles as a composer, the elusive nature of the dream melody, and the profound psychological impact of being married to such an oniric, elusive inspiration, thereby exploring the intricate complexities of the creative mind. It's as if he made a profound, unspoken pact with sleep itself, and his extraordinary, melancholic music was the beautiful, haunting price he paid. Story 8. The Farmer's Ergot Dreams, the Devil's Curse and the Visions. Now let's journey to a much darker and, frankly, far more disgusting place, medieval Europe. Imagine yourself in the shoes of a peasant, a man we'll call Theron, living in 14th century France. Theron's life was a relentless, brutal grind. He awoke not to the gentle chime of an alarm clock, but to the deafening clang of the church bell, the medieval equivalent of a blaring siren, only louder and somehow even less merciful. It was a constant, jarring reminder that the day's back-breaking labor had begun, and that sin, according to the local priest, lurked in every shadow. His home, a crude hut fashioned from wood and mud, was little more than a rudimentary shelter. A single smoky room housed his entire family, parents, children, grandparents, perhaps even a distant cousin who had never managed to find his own patch of land. Privacy was a concept as alien as personal hygiene. And the smell? Oh, it was a fragrant symphony, a subtle blend of stale, low-alcohol beer, the pervasive scent of human sweat clinging to coarse wool, the musky aroma of the goat that shared their living space, and a persistent, nauseating stench of mold and dampness that seemed to cling to everything, never truly dissipating. It was like living inside a moldy cheese, but without the cheese. Theron's work was incessant, a ceaseless cycle of toil. From sunrise to sunset, he would tirelessly plow the unforgiving fields with a wooden plow pulled by a stubborn ox, sow seeds with his calloused hands, and relentlessly pull weeds that seemed to sprout faster than he could remove them. He carried heavy buckets of water from the communal well, his spine bending under the weight until it resembled the letter S from sheer exhaustion. There was no weekend, no holidays, save for the religious ones, which were often more about penitence and fasting than actual rest. If he broke a bone, a common occurrence, the cure was a desperate prayer and perhaps a swig of warm, weak beer to dull the agonizing pain. If he caught a fever, which was even more common, the solution was the same: more fervent prayers, more beer, and the desperate hope that God would take pity on his suffering. Life was a brutal endurance race, and death a finish line that was always terrifyingly in sight. Theron's food was at best monotonous, at worst deadly. The cornerstone of his meager diet was bread, typically made from rye or barley, often bulked up with unsavory additions like sawdust, tree bark, or even clay to make it stretch further. There was no refrigeration, so meat, when it was available, was crudely salted or smoked, and often shared with opportunistic rats and insects. But the real, insidious danger lay within the rye itself. In damp, cold years, the grain was susceptible to a treacherous fungus, Claviceps purpurea, which produced highly poisonous alkaloids. Theron, of course, knew nothing of fungi or toxicology. He simply ate his daily bread, and slowly, insidiously, the potent venom began to accumulate within his body. Then the dreams began. At first, they were merely nightmares, fleeting visions of fire-eyed demons dancing menacingly in his smoky hut, whispering insidious promises of eternal damnation. But soon the fragile line between dream and waking reality completely dissolved. Theron began to experience vivid, terrifying hallucinations even when he was awake. He saw shadowy figures contorting in the corners of his vision, heard disembodied voices that mocked and tormented him, and felt excruciating, burning pains in his limbs, a sensation that drove him to the brink of madness. This was St. Anthony's fire, a horrifying plague that periodically swept across medieval Europe. His fingers and toes began to darken, to gangrene, and he heard chilling tales of others who had lost entire limbs which simply fell off their bodies. Theron's community, utterly devoid of any knowledge of fungi or the intricacies of toxicology, interpreted these horrifying symptoms as undeniable signs of witchcraft or the direct wrath of God. Theron's visions, his uncontrollable convulsions, and his excruciating pain were seen as irrefutable, proof that he had been married to the devil, bound in an unholy union. Hysteria spread like wildfire through the village. People exhibiting similar symptoms were swiftly accused of sorcery, dragged before brutal trials by ordeal, forced to plunge their hand into boiling water to retrieve a stone, or thrown into a river to see if they would sink. If they sank, they were innocent, but drowned. If they floated, they were guilty and punished anyway. Thousands were burned at the stake or drowned, innocent victims of brutal ignorance and irrational fear. The Church, which should have been a source of comfort and guidance, often contributed to the medical stagnation of the Middle Ages. It actively discouraged scientific progress, prohibiting the dissection of human bodies and vehemently insisting that people rely solely on prayers to saints and superstitious rituals to cure diseases. Illness was widely believed to be a punishment from God, a belief that fostered fatalism and actively impeded any meaningful investigation into potential cures. Medieval physicians, if they could even be called that, attributed diseases to an imbalance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, or to demons, sign, foul odors, astrology, and the alignment of stars. It was like trying to fix a complex clock with a hammer and a prayer book. The only cure for ST? Anthony's fire, more often than not, was the brutal amputation of the affected limbs, performed by unhygienic barber surgeons with unsterilized knives and absolutely no anesthesia. The vast majority of victims succumbed to infection or the ravages of the disease itself. Theron, by some inexplicable miracle, survived, but he was permanently scarred both physically and mentally. His ergot dreams had married him to a terrifying and inexplicable reality, a forced union with a disease that science would only begin to understand centuries later. He lived the remainder of his days as an outcast, a living testament to the devil's curse, or, as we now know, the insidious curse of a microscopic fungus. This harrowing story starkly reveals how invisible biological factors, such as a microscopic fungus, can profoundly shape cultural beliefs, legal systems, and even political stability. The complete inability to comprehend the true cause of ergotism led directly to supernatural interpretations and widespread persecution, vividly demonstrating the fragility of human understanding when confronted with unknown forces. The line between normal reality and hallucinatory reality was terrifyingly thin for many in the Middle Ages, given the extreme living conditions. Theron's story is a chilling reminder of how weird dreams can be far more than mere psychological phenomena. They can be direct symptoms of a brutal, incomprehensible physical reality. It's the kind of story that makes you profoundly grateful for LSD-free bread and the absence of a goat in your living room. Throughout the extensive and often perplexing tapestry of human history, the enigmatic nature of dreams has consistently presented itself as one of the most enduring, profound, and universally fascinating mysteries, compelling a myriad of diverse civilizations across vast stretches of time and geographical locations to tirelessly endeavor to decipher their elusive meanings and to comprehend their mysterious origins through an array of radically divergent and, at times, profoundly bizarre methodologies. From the earliest discernible dawn of recorded civilization, dreams were frequently revered as sacred portals to the divine realm, direct and often cryptic messages emanating from powerful deities or revered ancestral spirits, or as potent and often terrifying prophecies capable of dictating the very destiny of mighty kings, shaping the expansion and collapse of sprawling empires, and even influencing the seemingly mundane daily lives of individual mortals. In ancient Egypt, for instance, the act of dreaming was considered an exceptionally privileged and direct medium of communication with their vast and intricate pantheon of gods. Specific temples, such as those dedicated to Serapis, became renowned pilgrimage sites where the faithful would intentionally seek slumber, often under specific ritualistic conditions, in hopes of receiving divine visions that could potentially heal debilitating illnesses, accurately foretell future events, or offer crucial guidance for momentous decisions of state or personal life. The interpreters of dreams were figures of immense prestige, wisdom, and influence, often comparable to high priests or revered oracles, dedicated exclusively to the meticulous decipherment of these sacred and frequently cryptic nocturnal omens. Imagine the dramatic and tense scene, a pharaoh awakening in a cold sweat from a vivid, terrifying nightmare, immediately summoning his wisest and most trusted priests and seers to urgently unravel whether the unsettling vision of a three-headed crocodile signified a benevolent and life-giving inundation of the Nile, an impending and devastating plague that would decimate his kingdom, or, more insidiously, a treacherous betrayal from an ambitious vizier lurking within his own royal court. The Egyptians meticulously recorded their dreams on papyrus, believing that understanding them was key to navigating both the earthly and spiritual worlds. Dream books like the Chester Beatty Papyrus categorized dreams as either good or bad, offering specific interpretations for symbols such as seeing a cat, good, means a large harvest, or a lion, bad, means a quarrel. This systematic approach to dream interpretation underscores a deeply ingrained belief in the practical utility of dreams for daily life and governance. In stark contrast, in Mesopotamia, dreams were often perceived primarily as ominous warnings or foreboding portents of impending doom, and the failure to interpret them correctly was widely believed to inevitably lead to catastrophic disasters. Elaborate dream books or compendiums were meticulously compiled, listing a vast array of oniric symbols and their corresponding interpretations, serving as a kind of ancient, scholarly, and often terrifying pocket guide to the subconscious. The Assyrians, in particular, were known for their detailed dream interpretations, believing that even seemingly benign dreams could hide sinister omens, requiring elaborate rituals to avert potential misfortunes. Curiously, and here we stumble upon a truly weird element that bridges ancient mysticism with later historical horrors. Ergot, the insidious rye fungus that would later wreak such horrific havoc throughout the Middle Ages, may have been, without any conscious knowledge of its potent toxic effects, intentionally utilized in ancient rituals for various medicinal or spiritual purposes. Its psychoactive properties, even in minute, uncontrolled doses, could have profoundly contributed to inducing ecstatic experiences, vivid hallucinations, or profound visions that were then interpreted as direct encounters with the divine, or as profound journeys to other planes of existence. The boundary between genuine divine revelation and mere fungal intoxication was, shall we say, rather tenuous, and the profound ignorance concerning the underlying chemistry of these experiences inevitably led to deeply mystical, often terrifying, and sometimes tragically misinterpreted spiritual interpretations. This ancient practice, though shrouded in mystery, highlights humanity's long-standing quest to find meaning in altered states of consciousness, regardless of their true origin. The Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece, for example, are speculated by some scholars to have involved the consumption of a psychoactive brew that might have contained ergot, leading to profound, life-altering visions that were central to the religious experience, further blurring the lines between the sacred and the chemically induced. In ancient Greece, the philosophical and medical understanding of dreams became intricately and fascinatingly intertwined with the pursuit of healing and the profound journey of self-knowledge. Temples dedicated to Asclepius, the revered god of medicine, served as sacred sites of pilgrimage where the afflicted would purposefully go to sleep, earnestly hoping to receive miraculous curative visions or direct medical counsel within their dreams, a profound practice known as incubation. Patients would recline within these hallowed sanctuaries, often in direct physical contact with non-venomous serpents, a potent symbol of Asclepius and of renewal, still seen in medical symbols today, and patiently await the god himself or his divine messengers to appear to them in their dreams, offering precise diagnoses for their ailments or prescribing specific, often symbolic, cures. These dream cures were sometimes literal, like being told to eat a certain herb, or symbolic, requiring interpretation by a temple priest. The success of these incubations often relied on the patient's faith and the suggestive atmosphere of the temple, demonstrating the placebo effect long before it was scientifically understood. It was, in essence, a primitive yet deeply spiritual form of sleep medicine, where the subconscious mind was perceived as a direct and potent conduit to health and overall well-being. There were no complex pills or intricate surgeries, only unwavering faith, meticulously performed rituals, and perhaps a significant degree of self-suggestion amplified by the mysterious power of the mind over the body. Prominent philosophers such as Aristotle and Plato also delved deeply into the nature of dreams, albeit with more rational and philosophical approaches. Aristotle viewed dreams primarily as echoes of waking experiences, a reordering of daily sensory input, suggesting they were physiological rather than divine, and could even be useful for diagnosing bodily ailments. For example, a dream about a burning sensation might indicate a fever. He posited that dreams were simply the residual motions of sensory experiences processed by the mind during sleep. Plato, on the other hand, considered them a profound window into the very soul, where the deepest passions, desires, and even divine insights could manifest, often revealing the true character of the dreamer, particularly when the rational mind was at rest. He believed that the soul, when freed from the body's distractions during sleep, could access higher truths. The Greeks also had a rich tradition of prophetic dreams, with figures like Cassandra in the Trojan War being cursed with true but disbelieved prophecies received in dreams, highlighting the tragic irony of knowing the future but being unable to change it. Homer's Odyssey and Iliad are replete with instances of dreams guiding heroes and foretelling events, underscoring the cultural significance of dreams in ancient Greek society. However, as we inexorably advance into the medieval European era, the landscape of dream interpretation undergoes a significant and frankly rather terrifying transformation. Dreams was still occasionally regarded as divine messages, certainly, but the ascendance of Christianity introduced a stark and often perilous new dichotomy. Dreams could originate from God, divine revelation, often through saints or angels, from the insidious devil, demonic temptation or deception, leading to sin or heresy, or simply from the body itself, physiological disturbances, such as indigestion or an imbalance of humors. This distinction was of paramount importance and often carried life or death consequences, as a dream deemed to be of demonic origin could lead to severe spiritual condemnation, public shaming, or far worse, to a devastating accusation of heresy or witchcraft, which often ended in a fiery demise at the stake. Dreams were equally, if not more frequently, attributed to malevolent demonic influences or simply as crude physiological reflections of the body's humors. The omnipresent Catholic Church wielded immense and often absolute influence over the medical and scientific understanding of the era, frequently attributing illnesses to divine punishment for sin or to moral failings and actively discouraging, even forbidding, the dissection of human cadavers. This ecclesiastical prohibition, firmly rooted in religious beliefs and the deeply held idea that the human body was sacred and should not be violated, severely stagnated the advancement of anatomical and physiological knowledge for centuries, leaving medieval medicine in a state of near blindness and utter dependence on ancient, often incorrect, and highly speculative theories. The Church's emphasis on spiritual purity meant that physical ailments were often seen as a reflection of spiritual impurity, diverting attention from empirical observation and scientific inquiry, and leading to treatments that focused on prayer and penance rather than medical intervention. The predominant medical framework of the time was the archaic theory of the four humors: blood, sanguine, associated with air, hot and moist; phlegm, phlegmatic, associated with water, cold and moist; yellow bile, choleric, associated with fire, hot and dry; and black bile, melancholic, associated with earth, cold and dry. It was fervently believed that the delicate balance of these bodily fluids, which supposedly corresponded to the four classical elements, air, water, fire, earth, and the four qualities, hot, cold, moist, dry, was absolutely essential for the maintenance of health. An imbalance in these humors was thought to cause all diseases, both physical and mental, from fevers to madness. If an individual suffered from a fever, it was attributed to an excess of blood, and the prescribed solution was invariably bloodletting, frequently performed by unhygienic barber surgeons using dull, frankly disgusting blades, or through the application of ravenous leeches. If one felt melancholic or anxious, it was clearly an excess of black bile, and the cure involved aggressive laxatives or purges which, more often than not, only exacerbated the patient's condition, further depleting their already weakened constitution. Medieval medicine was, in large part, a perilous lottery of ineffective and, frequently, downright dangerous treatments, often doing more harm than good, and sometimes directly leading to the patient's demise. The lack of understanding of germ theory meant that even well-intentioned interventions often led to further infection and suffering. But here is where things truly become weird. The medieval understanding of dreams frequently intersected with the grim and terrifying reality of hallucinations caused by something as utterly mundane as bread. Ergotism, chillingly and aptly known as St. Anthony's fire, after the patron saint invoked by sufferers, and the burning sensation it caused, often described as a burning sensation in the limbs as if consumed by fire, was a recurrent and devastating plague that swept across medieval Europe. caused by the insidious fungus Claviceps purpurea, which thrives on rye grain, especially under damp and cold conditions. This insidious disease led to absolutely horrific symptoms. There were two primary forms: convulsive ergotism, which induced agonizing spasms, acute burning pains, violent and uncontrollable convulsions, terrifying delusions, and vivid, often demonic hallucinations, and gangrenous ergotism, which resulted in intense, burning pain, followed by the progressive darkening and eventual loss of limbs, which would simply fall off the body. Imagine the sheer terror. A peasant, already utterly exhausted by a life of relentless privation, suddenly feels his extremities burning as if in a private hell, while his fingers and toes begin to gangrene and eventually detach themselves, all while his mind is simultaneously invaded by grotesque and terrifying demonic visions. Historical accounts describe victims screaming in agony, believing they were being consumed by invisible flames or attacked by devils, their bodies contorted in horrifying ways, leading to mass hysteria and profound social disruption. The ignorance surrounding the true cause of these horrifying symptoms was absolute. Without any knowledge of microbiology or toxicology, how could people possibly explain such a profound horror? The answer for many was chillingly obvious: malevolent supernatural forces. These terrifying symptoms were widely attributed to witchcraft, direct demonic possession, or divine punishment for unknown sins. Hysteria would spread like an uncontrollable wildfire through villages. Individuals presenting similar symptoms were swiftly accused of sorcery, dragged before brutal trials by ordeal, forced to plunge their hand into boiling water to retrieve a stone, or thrown into a river to see if they would sink. If they sank, they were deemed innocent, but tragically drowned. If they floated, they were deemed guilty and punished anyway. Thousands were burned at the stake or drowned, innocent victims of a brutal ignorance and an irrational fear that relentlessly fed upon itself. The most infamous example is often cited as the Salem witch trials in colonial Massachusetts, though this occurred much later, 1692 to 1693, while not purely medieval. Some historians suggest that ergot poisoning could have contributed to the initial accusations and the vivid, shared hallucinations reported by the accusers, leading to a mass hysteria that mirrored earlier European witch hunts, demonstrating how biological phenomena could be tragically misinterpreted through a superstitious lens. Many contemporary historians now strongly believe that the infamous witch trials that led to thousands of gruesome deaths and burnings at the stake across Europe during the Dark Ages were likely directly linked to widespread outbreaks of ergot poisoning. The ergot fungus contains highly poisonous and potent psychoactive alkaloids, including lysergic acid, which was famously synthesized from the fungus in 1938 and is now more commonly known as LSD. This means that, unknowingly, people in the Middle Ages were experiencing powerful fungus-induced psychedelic trips, which often led to mass hysteria, widespread panic, and brutal religious persecution. It's the kind of weird historical fact that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the past, and makes you profoundly grateful for access to hallucinogen-free bread. The widespread nature of rye cultivation and the common storage practices made ergot contamination a recurring threat, turning the very staple of life into a source of madness and death, a silent killer disguised as nourishment. The complex interaction between the environment, rye harvests, damp conditions favorable for fungal growth, biological agents, the Claviceps purpurea fungus, physiological effects, hallucinations, convulsions, gangrene, and societal responses, witch hunts, religious interpretations, medical treatments based on humors, serves as a vivid and chilling example of how microscopic factors can have massive and far-reaching social and cultural consequences. This starkly demonstrates the inherent fragility of human understanding when confronted with invisible forces, and how our very perception of reality can be fundamentally molded by unknown biological factors. The line between normal reality and hallucinatory reality was terrifyingly thin for many in the Middle Ages, given the extreme living conditions and the profound lack of scientific knowledge. This period highlights the dangers of relying solely on superstition and dogma when faced with phenomena that defy immediate explanation. The evolution of medical understanding, transitioning from the attribution of diseases to divine punishments or imbalanced humors to the eventual scientific identification of a fungus as the true cause, illustrates a slow, often agonizing, but ultimately triumphant progression of scientific thought. The pervasive role of the Church in actively hindering medical progress and the gradual emergence of more empirical observations highlight the perpetual struggle between dogma and discovery. This serves as a powerful reminder that even scientific knowledge is a product of its time and context, and compels us to appreciate the monumental advancements of modern medicine. The gradual shift towards empirical observation and the scientific method, though slow, eventually allowed for the identification of pathogens and the development of effective treatments, moving humanity out of the dark ages of medical ignorance and into an era of more evidence-based practices. Even today, modern science still has an immense amount to learn about the intricate complexities of dreams. Although we now possess sophisticated frameworks like psychology and neuroscience to aid our understanding, we are still merely scratching the surface of comprehending the precise mechanisms of how and why we dream. But one fundamental truth remains constant. Dreams, whether they are profoundly prophetic, richly symbolic, or tragically induced by fungi, have always been and will continue to be one of the most fascinating and enigmatic experiences of the human condition. They serve as a constant reminder that there is far more within our minds than we can consciously comprehend, and that the veil between the conscious and the subconscious is often much thinner than we imagine. Neuroscience, for instance, meticulously explores the neural bases of dreams, identifying specific brain regions active during sleep and attempting to map the complex neural networks that generate our intricate nocturnal narratives. Psychology, in turn, continues to investigate dreams as profound expressions of repressed desires, deep-seated fears, unresolved traumas, and soaring aspirations. As groundbreaking figures like Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung proposed in their revolutionary theories. However, the exact nature of consciousness during dreaming, the precise evolutionary function of nightmares, which can be incredibly terrifying, the perplexing capacity of some dreams to appear premonitory, even if science often explains them as mere coincidences or confirmation biases, and the fundamental reason why we dream about certain things and not others all remain grand, unsolved mysteries. The burgeoning field of research into lucid dreaming, where the dreamer becomes fully aware that they are dreaming and can even exert some control over the dream narrative, opens up exciting new avenues for understanding consciousness and metacognition during sleep. But at its core, the dream realm remains a vast, largely unexplored territory, a unique universe that each of us visits every night, brimming with strangers and wonders that defy the logic of our waking world. The enduring intersection between neurobiology, psychology, and the myriad cultural interpretations of dreams continues to be one of the richest and most complex fields of human inquiry, serving as a constant reminder that, even in the age of advanced science, mystery still holds a fundamental and captivating place. The 20th century brought further advancements, with the development of sleep laboratories and the use of electroencephalography, EZ, to study brain activity during sleep. This allowed researchers to identify distinct sleep stages, including the crucial REM, rapid eye movement, sleep where most vivid dreaming occurs. The discovery of REM sleep in the 1950s by Oserinsky and Kleitman was a watershed moment, providing objective physiological markers for the dreaming state. This led to theories like the activation synthesis hypothesis by Hobson and McCarley, which proposes that dreams are primarily the brain's attempt to make sense of random neural activity during sleep. While this theory offers a physiological explanation, it doesn't fully account for the coherent narratives and emotional intensity often present in dreams. Other theories, such as the threat simulation theory, suggest that dreams serve an evolutionary purpose by allowing us to practice responses to threatening situations in a safe environment. The concept of dream incubation from ancient times found a modern echo in cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI, where patients are sometimes encouraged to think about specific topics before sleep to influence dream content, aiming to process anxieties or solve problems. Despite these scientific strides, the subjective experience of dreaming remains deeply personal and often elusive to objective measurement. The sheer diversity of dream content across individuals and cultures, from mundane daily events to fantastical, surreal landscapes, continues to challenge comprehensive scientific explanation. The question of why some individuals recall dreams vividly while others rarely do, or why certain themes recur across different cultures, further underscores the complexity. Even with advanced neuroimaging techniques, the precise neural correlates of specific dream experiences, such as the sensation of flying or the encounter with a dream stranger, are still being mapped. The intersection of conscious and unconscious processes during dreaming, the role of neurotransmitters, and the influence of external stimuli on dream content are all active areas of research. The dream world remains a frontier of human understanding, a testament to the mind's boundless capacity for creation and mystery. The study of dreams continues to be an interdisciplinary field, drawing insights from neuroscience, psychology, anthropology, and philosophy, each contributing a piece to the grand puzzle of our nocturnal lives. This ongoing exploration ensures that dreams, despite their ancient origins, remain a cutting-edge subject of scientific and humanistic inquiry. The cultural significance of dreams also persists, with many societies still valuing dream interpretation for personal guidance, artistic inspiration, or even spiritual enlightenment, demonstrating that the human fascination with our nocturnal narratives is as strong as ever. Before we surrender to the embrace of the night's slumber, allow me to share a few lesser-known dream stories, those whispers from the forgotten corners of history that almost nobody talks about, stories that compel us to profoundly question the very boundaries of reality and the boundless capabilities of the human mind. At times, the world of dreams takes an even more bizarre and utterly intriguing turn, fundamentally challenging our deepest understanding of the individuality of the mind and the very nature of conscious experience. There exist rare, yet consistently documented accounts, found both in ancient historical annals and in modern anecdotal reports, of distinct groups of people who emphatically claim to have experienced strikingly similar or even identically detailed dreams, all without any obvious external trigger or prior communication that could possibly explain such a phenomenon rationally. Imagine this chilling scenario: an entire village, on a night shrouded in a new moon and dense, swirling fog, simultaneously dreaming of the exact same shadowy, cloaked figure hovering menacingly over the ancient local cemetery, its eyes glowing with an eerie supernatural light. The details might be incredibly specific: the way the fog clung to the ancient tombstones, the faint scent of damp earth, the particular angle of the figure's head, or even a specific, unsettling sound that echoed in all their dreams, perhaps a mournful bell or a distant whisper. This shared imagery and sensory experience transcends mere coincidence, suggesting a deeper, inexplicable connection that defies conventional understanding. Or consider a close-knit group of friends who, without any prior discussion or mutual knowledge of each other's nocturnal experiences, all dream of a specific, intricately detailed scenario, perhaps an abandoned, decaying house with a grandfather clock perpetually frozen in time, its gears rusted and its pendulum motionless, and a single, flickering candle in an upstairs window, casting long, dancing shadows that seem to writhe on the walls, or a dense, labyrinthine forest where ancient, Gnarled trees whisper for forgotten secrets in an inaudible, ancient tongue, and a hidden stream flows with water that tastes of pure moonlight, leading to an impossible, glowing flower that pulses with an inner light, a place that none of them have ever physically visited in their waking lives. The consistency of these details across multiple dreamers, often reported independently and then compared, is what makes the phenomenon so baffling and compelling. To this very day, there is no concrete and widely accepted scientific explanation for this perplexing phenomenon. It is not telepathy in the conventional sense of direct and intentional thought transmission, nor is it merely contamination from food like the ergotism we discussed. Although that can certainly induce collective hallucinations, it doesn't typically result in identical shared dream narratives. It is simply inexplicable. It is as if the collective subconscious, operating on some mysterious and currently undetectable frequency, somehow tunes into a common wavelength, thereby creating a shared oniric tapestry that intricately weaves the threads of multiple individual minds into a single, coherent and often unsettling pattern. The stranger here is not a person or a tangible object, but the very experience itself, a profound vision that transcends the usual limits of the individual mind and manifests simultaneously across multiple consciousnesses, leaving in its wake only unanswered questions and a persistent, unsettling shiver down the spine of those who experience it. Could there possibly exist a deeper layer of reality, an ethereal plane, or perhaps a unified field of consciousness where our individual minds somehow meet and intricately intertwine when we surrender to the embrace of sleep? Or are these merely extraordinary and statistically improbable coincidences that so profoundly defy the very laws of probability, compelling us to seek explanations where, in fact, there are none? The notion that we might, unknowingly, be co-creating shared dream worlds with others, even if only for a fleeting moment, is one of the most fascinating and, at the same time, profoundly disturbing concepts in the study of dreams. It forces us to fundamentally question what it truly means to be alone, within the confines of our most intimate thoughts, and whether the individuality of the mind is as absolute and isolated as we tend to believe. Some theoretical frameworks, particularly those rooted in Jungian psychology or certain spiritual traditions, suggest that these collective dreams could be residual echoes of a shared ancestral consciousness, a kind of inherited memory bank, or perhaps even a tantalizing glimpse into a future, where the human mind has evolved towards a more profound and interconnected form of existence. The implications are vast, suggesting a level of interconnectedness that defies our current understanding of individual consciousness and hints at a shared psychic landscape. The phenomenon remains a tantalizing enigma, a testament to the mind's capacity for experiences beyond our current scientific grasp. The study of parapsychology sometimes delves into these areas, though mainstream science remains skeptical due to the lack of reproducible evidence. Nevertheless, the allure of shared dreams continues to captivate the human imagination, suggesting hidden dimensions of our collective psyche that we are only beginning to explore. And what if your dreams held the precise key to unlocking latent abilities and vast reservoirs of knowledge that you didn't even realize you possessed? As if there were a hidden, encrypted archive of pure genius patiently waiting to be accessed? There are truly fascinating stories, though often residing in the realm of the apocryphal and the scientifically inexplicable, of individuals who, following a particularly vivid, immersive, and by times profoundly transformative dream, claim to have suddenly and inexplicably remembered a language they had never formally studied, or acquired a complex new skill, such as playing a musical instrument with an astonishing and unprecedented mastery, or even solving an intricate and apparently insoluble problem that had tormented them for weeks or even months in their waking hours, defying all conventional logic and conscious effort. Consider the perplexing case of a mathematics student who grapples desperately with a complex theorem for weeks on end. Their nights and days filled with mounting frustration, countless scribbled equations and an overwhelming sense of impending defeat. Then, in a dream, the complete solution inexplicably reveals itself in a precise sequence of symbols and numbers that unfold with crystalline clarity, as if an invisible voice whispered the exact answer directly into their mind. They awaken, the solution indelibly etched in their memory, and successfully apply it to their waking problem, often with a sense of profound relief and astonishment. Or imagine a musician who awakens from a deep slumber with an entire symphony perfectly formed in their mind. The notes, the intricate arrangements, and the precise instrumentation so complete and harmoniously structured that they could never have consciously conceived it, not even in their moments of greatest inspiration. There are even more extreme anecdotal reports of individuals who, following a severe brain trauma, a prolonged coma, or an exceptionally intense dream, began to speak fluently a language they had never learned, such as the widely cited, though often debated, case of a man who, after an accident, reportedly began speaking fluent Swedish, despite having no prior exposure to the language. Other accounts describe individuals suddenly gaining the ability to paint complex works of art or compose intricate musical pieces without any formal training whatsoever, as if a hidden talent had been suddenly activated. These instances often leave the individuals themselves as bewildered as the observers, unable to explain the source of their newfound abilities, leading to speculation about hidden brain capacities or even past lives. The stranger here is a deeply hidden and largely unexplored part of your own mind. An unconscious genius that manifests itself only when the usual barriers of conscious thought are temporarily lowered or bypassed, thereby allowing the subconscious to access and process information in ways that the waking mind simply cannot. It is as if the brain, in its unique state of sleep, gains access to a vast, latent archive of knowledge and untapped potential that remains frustratingly inaccessible during the day, perhaps due to conscious filters, psychological blocks, or simply the linear nature of waking thought. This phenomenon compels us to profoundly question the true scope and boundless reach of the human mind, and what other extraordinary capabilities might be hidden within the deepest recesses of our subconscious, simply awaiting the opportune moment to reveal themselves. Could it be that all of us possess these hidden archives of genius, waiting for the right dream to unlock them? It is an idea that is simultaneously inspiring and perhaps a little unsettling, suggesting that we are far more complex and multifaceted than we currently imagine, and that the frontier between what we consciously know and what we are capable of knowing is far more fluid and permeable than it appears. While neuroscience still lacks a complete and definitive explanation for these enigmatic phenomena, the intriguing idea that the brain can reorganize, process, and access information in unexpected ways during sleep continues to be an area of intense and captivating research, hinting at the vast, unexplored potential of the sleeping mind. Some theories propose that during sleep, the brain engages in intensive memory consolidation and pattern recognition, which might, in rare instances, lead to novel insights or the integration of previously disparate pieces of information in a way that manifests as a new skill or knowledge. The very act of dreaming could be a form of unconscious problem-solving or creative synthesis, allowing the mind to explore possibilities unconstrained by waking logic. This is sometimes referred to as sleep learning, though direct evidence for acquiring entirely new, complex skills solely through sleep remains elusive. However, the anecdotal evidence is compelling, enough to keep researchers intrigued and the rest of us wondering what hidden talents might be lurking just beneath the surface of our consciousness, waiting for the perfect dream to bring them to light. The concept also touches upon theories of inherited memory or genetic predispositions that might be activated under specific, unusual circumstances, such as profound dream states. Now, let us turn to a somber historical fact that transcends the individual experience and powerfully employs the metaphor of dreams to describe a very real, profoundly painful and utterly devastating tragedy that befell an entire nation. In the twilight of the 18th century, Poland, which had once been a vast and formidable Polish-Lithuanian commonwealth at its zenith, one of the largest and most influential states in Eastern Europe, a beacon of religious tolerance and a unique parliamentary monarchy, known for its golden liberty that granted extensive rights to the nobility and limited the power of the monarch, found itself confronting a nightmare that was not merely individual, but which descended upon an entire nation, like a silent, relentless plague. This nightmare was not a sudden, cataclysmic war, but a slow, methodical dismemberment, a geopolitical vivisection. In a series of meticulously orchestrated and ruthlessly executed events by its ambitious and implacable neighboring powers, the burgeoning Russian Empire under Catherine the Great, the ascendant Kingdom of Prussia under Frederick the Great, and the powerful Habsburg monarchy of Austria, Poland was progressively dismembered in three brutal partitions, occurring in 1772, 1793, and 1795, until it completely ceased to exist as an independent state on the map of Europe, a devastating fate that very few nations in history have ever endured. The very concept of a sovereign Poland was erased. Its territory swallowed by its more powerful neighbors, its people absorbed into foreign empires. Imagine the profound implications of an entire nation with its own millennia-old history, its rich and vibrant culture, its unique language, and a proud and resilient people having its very existence erased from the global political map. For the Polish people, this was not merely a distant political event, a mere redrawing of borders on a cartographer's map. It was a deep and existential collective trauma, a nightmare of dismemberment that haunted their national identity and their collective memory for over a century. Poland became a stranger to itself, its people divided and subjugated under the oppressive dominion of foreign empires that ruthlessly imposed their own laws, languages, and cultures. Poles were forced to endure immense and systemic suffering, widespread confiscation of ancestral properties and lands, forced resettlement of entire populations to weaken national cohesion, brutal suppression of their language, literature, and cherished cultural traditions, and a coercive cultural re-identification where they were compelled to adopt the identities of their new rulers, whether Russian, Prussian, or Austrian. This cultural annihilation was a deliberate strategy to dismantle the Polish nation from within, aiming to erase its distinct identity and integrate its people into the occupying empires, effectively making them foreigners in their own land. The suppression of Polish language in schools, the imposition of foreign legal systems, and the forced conscription into foreign armies all contributed to this profound sense of loss and alienation, creating generations who grew up without a sovereign homeland. This traumatic experience, however, paradoxically ignited a profound and enduring quest for a national identity that stubbornly refused to die. The very absence of an independent Polish state, ironically, fueled a series of desperate but heroic revolts and uprisings against the occupying powers, most notably the valiant Kosciuszko Uprising in 1794, led by Tadeusz Józef, a revered national hero who had also fought bravely in the American Revolutionary War, passionately defending ideals of liberty and self-determination. It was a desperate, almost dreamlike attempt to awaken from this national nightmare, to restore the cherished sovereignty and the progressive ideals of a liberal constitution that had been brutally crushed by the neighboring powers. The uprising, though ultimately unsuccessful and brutally suppressed, became a powerful symbol of Polish resistance, a testament to their unwavering spirit in the face of overwhelming odds, inspiring future generations to continue the fight for independence. The sheer will to resist, even when hope seemed lost, became a defining characteristic of the Polish national spirit during this period. Despite the overwhelming defeat of the uprising and the subsequent Third Partition, which definitively eliminated Poland from the map until it miraculously re-emerged as an independent state in 1989, Following the tumultuous end of World War I, the dream of a free and united Poland persisted with an unshakable force. Polish identity, instead of fragmenting and disappearing under the relentless weight of oppression, transformed into a messianic conception where Poland was seen as the Christ of nations, destined to redeem all oppressed peoples through its own profound suffering and eventual spiritual transcendence. This messianic narrative provided a powerful framework for enduring hardship and maintaining hope, transforming national tragedy into a sacred mission. Polish writers, poets, and artists of the diaspora, such as the legendary Adam Mickiewicz, whose epic national poems became a powerful beacon of hope and resistance, and the incomparable Frederick Chopin, whose melancholic and passionate music expressed the very soul and sorrow of a lost nation, imbued their works with an intense and deeply moving patriotic message, thereby keeping alive the burning flame of the nation in a collective dream of liberty that transcended physical borders and decades of brutal occupation. Their art became a form of national resistance, a way to preserve identity when political structures had crumbled, ensuring that the idea of Poland lived on in the hearts and minds of its people, passed down through generations. The partitions of Poland dramatically exemplify how a dream can serve as an incredibly powerful metaphor for national identity and for a collective trauma that echoes profoundly through generations. The way such a devastating historical event can irrevocably shape the collective consciousness of a people and generate a persistent and unwavering quest for self-determination is a truly fascinating and deeply inspiring phenomenon. This demonstrates that dreams can indeed be profoundly shared cultural experiences, even if metaphorical, and that a nation can be apagada, erased from the physical map, yet continue to live vibrantly within a collective dream of resistance, unwavering hope, and eventual rebirth. The complex and treacherous shifts in alliances among the major European powers of the era, Austria, Prussia, Great Britain, and France, all constantly maneuvering to prevent the hegemony of any single nation or alliance, served as the implacable backdrop for this profound tragedy, vividly illustrating how classic power politics can lead to enduring pesadelos, nightmares, for weaker nations, but also how the indomitable human spirit can resist and continue to dream of a better future, even in the most somber and oppressive circumstances. It is a chilling reminder that sometimes the worst nightmares do not happen only when we are asleep, but also when history unfolds in brutal and profoundly unjust ways, and that the collective will of a people can keep a dream alive for centuries. The legacy of the partitions continues to influence Polish identity and foreign policy to this day, a testament to the enduring power of a national nightmare and the dream of sovereignty. This historical event serves as a stark warning about the fragility of national borders and the enduring power of cultural identity in the face of political oppression. The story of Poland's partitions is a powerful narrative of loss, resilience, and the enduring human capacity to dream of freedom even when it seems utterly unattainable. If you're somehow still awake, which I sincerely doubt, you've just journeyed through some of the most mind-bending dream stories in history. From prophetic visions that seemingly united strangers in unexpected marriages, to the collective nightmares of entire nations, and the fungus-induced hallucinations that shaped the faith and fear of a bygone era. I would absolutely love to know where you're watching from tonight. Leave a comment below and perhaps share your own bizarre dream. If you've had one recently, especially if you accidentally married a stranger in your sleep, did any of these stories make you think differently about your own subconscious adventures? The way dreams intertwine with reality, subtly molding relationships, inspiring creations, and even profoundly influencing the destiny of nations, is something that continues to utterly fascinate and delightfully confuse us. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy drifting off to these strange dream stories. We'll be back next Wednesday with another journey through the weirdest dreams in history. Sleep tight, and who knows, maybe you'll dream about something we talked about tonight. See you in your dreams.